Welcome to this special Choices and Challenges Forum. The Choices and Challenges series at Virginia Tech explores the human questions, the ethical, social, legal, and political concerns that result from advances in science, medicine, and technology. For more than a decade, the Choices and Challenges programs have considered a wide variety of topics, ranging from breakthroughs in the biological sciences that can change the features of a single microscopic cell to advances in physics and engineering that can alter the way we function in our universe. Our topic for this Choices and Challenges Forum is Reinventing the Human, the $6 Million Body. And we'll be discussing one of the most dramatic achievements in modern medicine, the ability to extend life through the use of organ transplantation. Helping us examine the ethical, social, and policy concerns raised by organ transplantation are David Ayares, researcher and vice president at PPL Therapeutics Incorporated; Javi Moraim, medical ethicist at the University of Tennessee College of Medicine; William Payne, transplant surgeon at the Fairview University Medical Center in Minneapolis and past president of the United Network for Organ Sharing; Sheila Rothman, social historian at the Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons; Andrew Rowan, Senior Vice President of the Humane Society of the United States; Evelyne Shuster, medical ethicist at the Philadelphia Veterans Affairs Medical Center. Our moderator is George Annis, Chair of the Health Law Department at Boston University's Schools of Medicine and Public Health. Professor Annis has also chaired the Massachusetts Organ Transplant Task Force. Now let's listen in to the panel's discussion.
My job is to ask questions and to try to explore this overall issue, this fascinating question of reinventing the human, which our philosophers might say began with Descartes or maybe even Aristotle, but which we're going to date from the 50s and the first organ transplants that were done right here in the United States. And we're going to begin with the case that is in your materials, and the case, which is a very simple case. We have two people, Alfred and Maria, each of whom need a kidney transplant, and we only have one kidney available. So let me start with Bill. And how does this work? Who gets the transplant? Who gets the kidney?
Well, maybe I need a little more information. Whose kidney is it? If it's Maria's sister's kidney, I think Maria ought to get it.
Okay, well, no, they're just, as far as, they're just on a list. They got no relatives. They're just going to be on what is this list we have? I thought we did have a list of.
We do. All the patients that are waiting for transplants are, of course, registered on a list. And the determination of who gets that particular organ at any particular time is a bit of a moving target, which people don't always understand. There are issues of efficacy. That is there a matching of the donor and recipient? Has it been performed? Is it available? Is that information weighed in? And then there are issues, practical issues of proximity. Is the organ close enough to the recipient?
Oh, well, how does that work? I mean, the person who lives closest to the next organ available, they get it? Or?
No, I think that the list that is generated for potential recipients is generated within a reasonable proximity, in most cases, to the available organ. That is, you can't exceed the limitations of transportation and time, particularly.
So we have to use kidneys locally, or can't ship a kidney from here to California, for example? Or?
Well, those are loaded terms now, because locally, for purposes of allocation policy, may not be locally for purposes of practical travel times, because when you set up local organ procurement areas, you inevitably have dividing lines, and people live close to those dividing lines. And when that occurs, somebody may be local in this region, but not local to the region across the river, over the mountains, or on the other side of the lake.
Well, Sheila, would it be better to have like a big national list instead of having these geographical problems?
It's very complicated. Organ transplantation, like everything else in our healthcare system, is quite fragmented. And although it is the closest thing that we have to a national health insurance, in the sense that dialysis is available to everybody, and then you deal with the whole question of transplantation, it's very, very complicated. And for example, every person who's on that list first is evaluated by a transplant team. So each transplant team has their own list of patients. When organs come up, and this is what's in New York, and again, I don't know whether what's in New York is true for everybody else, the hospital that's next will go for it. And then the question is, do they have a match or should it go for someone else? Then the whole question gets more complicated when we deal with the question of these two people, because in some states, you're allowed to be on more than one list. You don't have to be only on one list. Sometimes states allow you to go to, it depends on your insurance company, to go to another state. So nothing is as kind of fixed and simple as who should it go to. It depends which hospital you're on, it depends where you are on the list, it depends what your blood type is, it depends what your answer. I'm just talking about the fact that we're talking about cadaveric kidneys. If we move into the whole question of whether it's live, we're into a whole different game.
But we'll do that soon. Evelyne, yeah.
Yes, well, the idea of giving the kidney to an organ to the community, the assumption is that people will be more inclined to give. There is that people want to know where their organs go, and they feel comfortable giving if they know that the community is going to benefit from a resource which is vital.
Bill, they're dead when they give. They don't really give. And who gives these kidneys?
We all give them, and in a sense, because you're right, the person who's donating the organs is dead, but the judgment of that person is supposed to live on through the next of kin, or the people who have that ability to substitute their own judgment for that of the person who's dead. Some people have expressed their wishes before death, and those wishes should be carried out, I think, when possible. But many people have not expressed their wishes before death, and in those cases...
Why don't they? Do you have any idea? I mean, I don't know, they're supposed to sign organ donor cards or something? Yes?
Well, certainly that we hope they would sign organ donor cards and talk it over with their family. That's the big public push, of course, to try and get people to do that. But frankly, it's a topic that many people don't like to talk about, our own death.
I mean, we call this the gift of life. I'm sure you've heard that. But usually when you give a gift, you know who you're giving it to? Why don't we tell people who gets their kidneys?
You know, there was an interesting recommendation by a surgeon down in South Carolina that came out a few years ago in one of the major medical journals. And he actually was recommending letting families, and particularly individuals, judging for their own futures after they're dead, to designate what kind of person might be a recipient. You know, I want a veteran to get my organs, or I want somebody in the PTA, doggone it. And he made a fairly interesting case for it. Obviously, the greatest counterexample is going to be, or shall we say caveat, is going to be that could certainly be used to implement racist or discriminatory values. I don't want any person of thus and such a faith or ethnic group to get my organs, and so that could be potentially a significant.
But whose organs are they? Why shouldn't I be able to say that?
Well, that was his chief argument. You know, whose body is it anyway?
Interesting. Evelyne, yeah?
Yeah, I like to go back to the notion of gift. Because
right.
it's a
Well, with gift of life, sure, you can talk about that.
It's a very special gift. And you're right, there is some scholars that talk here to make the analogy between giving, you know, as we know we are pushing the Christmas season, we're all going to buy gift. But we think we do that voluntarily, freely. But in fact, the underlying philosophy is that you are obligated to give, you are obligated to receive, and you are obligated to repay. So there is no freedom. And if you do not give in Christmas time, you have, as Marcel Mauss, the French anthropologist, said, you have a rotten face. You will never go to a Christmas dinner with something in your hand. And that comes back that it's what is left from our practice in a primitive society. Now, for the organs, it's very interesting because the donor give his organs, which is the most, it's a priceless gift which can never be repaid. And it has been argued that this type of gift, which can never be repaid, it creates the tyranny of the gift. You are in such a position that is so overwhelming because precisely you cannot repay the deceased person. You cannot repay the family who give consent to take the organs of their loved one. So therefore, I believe that's the reason why we want to keep the recipient away, apart, anonymous. We cannot say, I want my heart to go to that other person. And to know that person, because it will create an obligation so overwhelming that the recipient will never be able to live a normal, quote unquote, life.
Well, Sheila, how does this work with families? I mean, we know that we do have brothers and sisters give kidneys to each other. Does that work out okay?
It's very, as usual, everything in the real world is very, very complicated. When the gift of life was started in the 1960s, it was assumed that very few people were going to survive. We didn't have anti-rejection drugs. We don't have the technologies that we had. So it was felt that it was okay to ask a parent to give to a child, to ask somebody who you were terribly close to for this kind of gift, with the knowledge that, you know, it might not work. As organ transplantation has become a more ordinary event because we now have anti-rejection drugs, you know, most people don't reject their kidneys and so on and so forth. The whole question of gift has become much more complicated. And the whole question of what we meant by altruism is becoming much more questioned. And we're, as we've moved in our country particularly, to not only allow family members, but those who are emotionally related to us to give.
Let's say not only should we do this, should we open this up to strangers to be able to give because they feel strongly about it, but we should permit people to offer to buy organs. What do you think about that? I mean, you've certainly heard that argument that if we really wanted to increase the supply of kidneys, we should give them $50,000 or $100,000, and then people would sell their kidneys.
Well, aside from kind of personal feelings about that, from a pragmatic point of view, that's not likely to work because the argument has been made that the minute you enter into that sort of commerce, you lose the gift-giving capabilities that everybody has because people will start to pull away from it. It's no longer a gift, it's a commercial enterprise. And so just from a pragmatic point of view, I don't think that's a very good idea. From an internal philosophical point of view, it doesn't seem to be a very good idea either because of again, the development of the gift idea and the undermining of the gift idea. So from both perspectives, I don't think it's a very good idea.
If you're in the private sector, I mean,
well, I think the idea of a gift is different in different countries. I mean, in the United States, we do give a gift in the sense it's voluntary. In other countries, such as Spain, it's assumed that you are going to donate your organ unless you tell someone you're not going to. So it's not a gift. It's more like what you call an obligation.
But in France, it's exactly the same idea. Your body does not belong to you when you die. The country, but the country will take your organ unless you opt out of the system, and you have to know the law. And I think that was recently, 1994, when they signed that bioethics law in which you said, well, if you don't opt out, you can be certain that everything that can be recyclable will be recyclable. But France is different from America because the value in France is the value of solidarity and not individualism. We have a mutual obligation to one another to help each other, and that's why they have the national health care insurance, the universal access, where health care is a right and not a privilege, and so on and so forth. So I understand, so that I don't think that undermine the theory of the gift. I really do not.
Sheila, yeah, go ahead.
First we should say that it's illegal to sell organs here. I mean, so that's one of the things. The question
Well,
is,
we can change the law.
You can change the law,
Right?
but we should make that clear. But there really are three systems. There's the European system, which moves primarily towards presumed consent and the use of cadavers in a very, very small group of live donations, where they really, for the most part, limit it to the immediate family, and the Spain and the other situation. There's the American system, which is moving more towards where some of our hospitals now do 60% of their kidney transplants are from live donors. So we're moving that direction. And then there's the Asian system, and I've just spent some time in the Philippines and on this, in which it's almost all live organs and almost all sale. And if you begin to look at what's happened in countries like that, I think you might want to begin to reconsider if you really want to go down that route. I mean, there's really a total commodification of the body and the use of the bodies of the poor for organ transplantation.
My question is this. We can buy and sell almost everything. We can buy and sell eggs, sperm, surrogate mother, women. model, as we know, that they can sell their body. Why can everybody is making money out of a biological product and our body? Why can the donor make money out of his organ?
Empirical questions arise here that I think we can't settle just sort of sitting around musing from a chair. Some of those empirical questions have to do with to what extent will we get less healthy organs? Right, that is one of the problems. So if you are appealing to the marketplace, you can have lots of folks donating organs, especially if they stand to make a great deal of money, or money that to them is a great deal. You may have folks volunteering who are less than healthy, but then
not
we
only
do have
volunteering,
ways.
but demanding that their organs be used because
Well,
they need the
except
money.
that you can turn down someone and saying, I'm sorry, but we've done our blood tests and you've got HIV, and we generally prefer not to use those organs. So one can do screens, and so somebody can demand all he wants. That doesn't mean that somebody has to purchase what he demands to sell. Another question has to do with the abuse of poor folks. And again, and these are empirical questions. I offer no answer one way or the other, but some of the abuses that have been observed in some countries where people are destitute and who get very little of the money, and then lots of middle people along the way get lots and lots of money. On the one hand, the argument says, look, it is unfair to put the people in that position that they would get just some little pittance and then be permanently minus a kidney. Obviously, at this point, we're talking about living donations and not so much, not exclusively about cadavers. But at the same time, on the other hand, that is a very paternalistic approach, so the argument goes. And isn't it up to this person to say, look, I would rather feed my family who are this close to starvation right now. Who are you to tell me that I should not be permitted to use what resources I can to do what I need to do to get my family fed? So that's another one. The third empirical question has to do with how many donors. It was suggested that perhaps if we take away the gift aspect, that we'll have fewer people donating and fewer organs. Actually, the payment, again, it's an empirical question. The payment approach has been offered as a way of increasing rather than decreasing donors. Many people donate blood without remuneration, even though others donate for remuneration. So it's an empirical question. I don't think we can settle it just sitting in an armchair.
Dave,
Well, I guess you take it one step further in the sense that what about obtaining organs from prisoners? I think we would all object to taking organs from political prisoners as is done in China and other parts of Asia. But I think what's being offered now is that they're considering permuting a life, giving someone the choice between capital punishment, being put to death, or getting a life sentence. So now, what kind of a choice is that?
I think there's a difference when we're talking about cadaveric kidneys and when we're talking about live, and sometimes we're kind of moving between the two.
we have been mixing them, okay.
And I think that it's kind of important to separate out them, because if you're talking about giving a family a small amount of money for donating the organs of a person who's already deceased, I think it's quite different than if we're talking about somebody who's alive to give a part of their body.
You think the first one's okay?
If we're going to go that route, I find that less troubling than the live one. And one of the reasons, I do have some data for you for example, the Philippines. When you take a kidney, it's a long recovery period. It takes 2 to 3 weeks generally for somebody to be back at work or something like that. What happens in places where poor people come and give their kidneys, and what happens in the Philippines, for example, is that you go into a neighborhood where people are living on the garbage dumps and the doctors test their blood and get their blood and get the list going. I mean, if you want to know what the system looks like, maybe we should talk about the real. And then when they have a patient, usually someone who's come from Japan, because Japan doesn't allow for transplantation, and the Philippines, very few people could afford it, they go down and they pick the person whose blood matches and brings them to the hospital, and then they get paid for the kidney. What happens is that this person generally goes back 2 or 3 days later to work. And in the community that we were involved with, they were lifting heavy things. And what happened was that the men on the job would say, these were men, in India they've been women, okay, we don't want you for this job anymore. So when an expose was done on the Philippine television, what they were saying is, well, we got the money for the kidney, but we lost our jobs because we weren't strong enough to do the work anymore. And they thought they weren't. So they thought in the end that their children were worse off after they had done that, and that their bodies were worse off. And we've had the same thing, and you've probably seen the stories on India, where the women from Madras kind of hold up their saris and say, you know, I've been weak since then. And the American doctors will say, well, why are they weak? It doesn't happen here. Well, it doesn't happen here because it's different, and we take care of people differently. And people, if you're going to go back to heavy work right afterwards, you're going to have different kinds of problems than you are otherwise. The other last point I want to make is that We know now, too, that live organs from living people generally have a longer survival than those from cadavers. So if we're going to go for the best organs, we're going to go for those from living donors. The moral question is, should we go for the best, or how are we going to do with this, and how are we going to deal with this equitably? Because we do have some data. We have a lot of data.
Do you think there should be a limit on the number of times somebody can receive a transplant, whether that transplant was originally from a pig or a human, and maybe the transplant was either rejected or the person continued a lifestyle and caused that organ to fail? Should they be put back on the donor list and receive another transplant?
Okay, great question. I'm going to start with Bill, but anybody else can have a comment on limiting the number of transplants. We've got a shortage after all.
Well, there's a big difference between someone who has rejection of a transplant and needs a second transplant as opposed to someone who got a transplant for alcoholic liver disease and had recurrence of their alcoholic liver disease. I think there's a huge difference implicit within your question. And right now we certainly evaluate patients based upon their likelihood of recurrent disease. And so if someone has end-stage liver disease, they're evaluated for what's the cause and what's the probability of recurrence. And if they have the type of disease that doesn't recur, then it's not an issue. If they have the type of the disease that can recur, you ask, have they stopped drinking? Are they doing what's appropriate to do to prevent recurrence? And if they're not transplanted in the first place, nor should they be transplanted second, third, fourth, and certainly if they demonstrated that they can't comply, they wouldn't be transplanted. So the answer is, I guess, why are they needing it?
Okay, what about in the case of perhaps a rejection? I
think,
understand
again, you
lifestyle.
evaluate the patient for the probability of recurrence, that is recurrent rejection. And if you can demonstrate a medical reason why you can predict that with certainty or near certainty, I don't think people would retransplant them. You have to balance the probability of efficacy with fairness. And we're not always fair in the sense that we don't have control over what's the bum deal that some people get. And if they get a bum deal, we can make a reasonable decision to not include them in the pool of recipients, I think, if they're likely to recur.
So in other words, we need to figure out a bit more clearly, okay, is it an illness, substance abuse, whether alcohol, drugs, what have you? Is it a vice? Probably a little bit of each, frankly, in a lot of cases. But we're very ambivalent about that. And then we also have, for example, in our prognostications, and transplant teams do this all the time, looking at the patient, you look at the support system, you look at education. Is this person able to keep up with the medication regimen? All of that is a very responsible thing. On the other hand, what that will mean is that, too bad for single folks, Henry David Thoreau is toast with the average organ transplant group because he hasn't got a support system. Or somebody who has mental illness, or somebody who's uneducated. Somebody who's minority has, frankly, in some transplant groups, a distinctly lesser chance because it'll just be assumed the person won't comply well. And so it's not to denigrate the idea of using resources prudently. It is, however, to say, watch out when you're just feeding in assumptions rather than actual empirical evidence.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Continuing with the idea that shortages are an important issue in transplantation, regeneration, etc. Can you discuss the question of extending and improving life beyond the normal aging process? What resources should be diverted from children and young adults who are living healthily or perhaps ill to older individuals in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on?
Evelyn, you want to try that first?
When we talk about scientific progress, we need to know the goal. And lately has been a lot of hoopla and discussion about extending human life for 50 more years in a very productive life. And then people are claiming, they are applauding that. saying that, well, when I finish my my professional work, I have still 50 more years in order to do whatever I want to do, write my book, whatever it is. And I think a lot of people are happy about that. So the question is, how do we define the goal of scientific progress?
That question rings of discrimination, however, in that you're saying that the quality of life of a person who's 60 or older is not as valuable as the quality of life, who's aged 10 to 20. I think given that we are all living longer, I think you would hope that anything to improve the quality of life of the elderly is going to be given the same import as to younger and young adults.
I certainly think that one underlying assumption is that there is some fixed pool of resources that we are going to apply towards medical care or towards the well-being of citizens, and that given that, we should be given that proportion of resources, and then the people who deliver those treatments can sort it out how they're going to apply them. Well, that isn't how it ought to work. I mean, we can decide as a society to spend more money on medical care if that's what we want to do. And so I don't subscribe to the theory that we have a limited pool of resources that's been defined thus far. We know what we spend, and it's a lot, and we could reapportion that, but that's not the only thing that we could do. We could spend more on all of it if we wanted to.
We invite you to learn more about this topic at our website, www.cis.vt.edu/choices and challenges.